Now, one of the things that makes the TPNW different to a lot of other non-nuclear campaigning is the focus on humanitarian consequences of using nuclear weapons. So we've asked one of our new executive committee members, Bridget Tiller, if she'll just say a few words about that. So Bridget, over to you.
Hi everyone, my name's Bridget, and as Russell said, I'm part of the Christian CND Exec this year. I've been asked to round off the evening by talking briefly about the humanitarian aspects of nuclear war and encouraging everyone to be thinking about how we should be framing the public conversation on this topic. Just to give a quick content warning, there will be brief mentions of death and injury. Too often, we are encouraged by governments and others to think about war as a pragmatic affair. Wars are portrayed as a means to an end and ultimately a necessity. This narrative is all the more prevalent when we talk about nuclear weapons. The government frame our nuclear stockpile as a deterrent, one that will ultimately keep us and others safe. They focus on words like security and have often said that these weapons preserve peace and prevent coercion. It's easy to see why governments prefer to keep the conversation here. The moment we stop to think about the staggering humanitarian consequences of dropping even a single nuclear weapon, especially in comparison to conventional weapons, the deterrent begins to feel a lot less safe and a lot less appealing. Only 2 nuclear weapons have ever been dropped at the end of World War II at Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Around 215,000 people died immediately from these 2 bombs, and the devastating medical, psychological, and environmental effects continue to impact on survivors and their descendants. Each year, the number of recorded casualties from these bombs continues to grow and is now well over 300,000 from Hiroshima alone. In this way, nuclear war is fundamentally different from conventional warfare. The weapons we have today are many, many times more powerful than those that were dropped on Japan at the end of World War II. The warheads in UK's Trident arsenal are 8 times as destructive as the bomb that devastated Hiroshima. The scale of damage they could do is almost unimaginable. Each of the survivors and victims of these weapons will have a face, a name, and a story. They'll have goals and fears and favourite colours and opinions on the football. To quote Hiroshima survivor and disarmament campaigner Setsuko Thurlow, each person had a name. Each person was loved by someone. Let us ensure that their deaths were not in vain. It's a travesty that we're being encouraged to forget this through a rhetoric of security and safety, and it's one that we as Christians must rectify. Recentering the conversation about nuclear weapons on these stories and human consequences is a technique that's being increasingly employed by campaigning organisations. A key example is that of the TPNW, which includes clauses that focus on these impacts. And as a Christian, it's a narrative that particularly speaks to me. The Bible is full not only of references to peace and being peacemakers, many of which we've heard this evening, but also of instances where we're called to think about the individual humans and lives that impact and are impacted by each of our actions. Jesus reached out to and helped the poor, the sick, and the needy, and he related to them as individuals. He often flew in the face of convention and personal reputation in order to provide this love and support to people. He loved almost recklessly, and he asks us to do the same. Nowhere can we take this teaching on board more than in our attitudes to peace and nuclear weapons. I'd ask you all to come away from this celebration of 6 decades of peace activism, thinking on God's calling for us all to become peacemakers who love one another and our supposed enemies with the same commitment as Jesus.